All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining the next session. This one's a little bit unique in that we're going to be doing a panel discussion, which we haven't done up until this point, at least with such a large group. We have so many different experts from whether current C3PAOs or aspiring C3PAOs, and it's going to be a good mix, I believe. And Scott Edwards in Huntsville is going to be moderating this particular session. So let me go ahead and jump in to this. It's going to be really covering CMMC assessments and just some general questions around CMMC that I think are pressing, and to hear from more or less a group of assessors or a group of people that have been trained. I think it's going to be really good. So nevertheless, jumping into it first, we have Mr. Jerry Leishman of the CORTAC Group. He is the Executive Vice President and National Security and Compliance Practice Director, again, for CORTAC Group. He has 30 plus years in the industry, and 13 of which were with Microsoft. His current focus is assisting the DIB in understanding and meeting increasing regulatory and contractual risk and obligations, including ITAR, EAR, DFARS, and CMMC. Jerry has additional experience developing compliance and security programs with some other acronyms: ISO 27701, SOC 1 and 2, and FedRAMP. Jerry is also active with the CMMC Accreditation Board Standards Working Group, which also Scott is a part of. He speaks nationally on CMMC business impacts and contributes to the Pacific Northwest Defense and Aerospace Alliance through supplier education and adoption of CMMC. And he also is in the Pacific Northwest in the great state of Washington. Also, we have Mr. Matthew Titcomb. He is the CISO for Gigit Incorporated and the CISO of Safe Eon. Matthew is a CISSP and CMMC provisional assessor and wears several senior level hats across multiple firms, all focused on cybersecurity. Before an exciting career in the industry, he served as the director over the Air Force Enterprise Information System Program at the U.S. Air Force Academy and an operations branch chief at the Air Force Network Integration Center and was branch chief at the Air Force Communications Agency. So a wealth of knowledge from Mr. Titcomb. Next, our third person, we have Miss Stacy High-Brinkley. She is the Senior Director of Compliance Solutions and Services at CASC. She has 25 years or more experience as an information security professional. Her background includes building and securing networks with expertise in establishing and implementing streamlined cybersecurity programs. She holds numerous cyber certifications and is also a certified CMMC provisional assessor, as I mentioned earlier, as well as an RMF assessor for DoD. So that's more or less our group, I believe. And lastly, we have Mr. Scott Edwards. So Scott is going to be doing the moderation and also has a session a little bit later. He's the president of Summit 7 and brings 20 plus years of experience providing thought leadership around security and compliance and cloud services as a national speaker. This thought leadership has resulted in him being invited to participate in that CMMC standards working group I mentioned earlier and speak at conferences throughout the DoD community, mostly virtual now. Before Summit 7, Scott spent 6 plus years working as the senior computer engineer at the NASA data center. And Scott is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and obtained a Master of Science in Computer Science from James Madison University. Without further ado, Scott, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. So we are here with Stacy and Jerry and Matt Titcomb, and we are very excited to have these three professionals today to talk about CMMC and the assessments. And we have a number of questions that we want to go through, questions that we have gotten multiple times on other webinars, questions that we have gotten from all of you out there, and so we've compiled those together, and we're going to run through some of those today. So I'm really looking forward to this session. I think we're going to have some great content. We're going to have some great feedback from Stacy, Jerry, and Matt. So I guess I'm going to jump in. The first thing here is I'm going to kind of do this in round robin style, and to give everybody a chance to talk. And then at the end, I'm just going to kind of open up some questions for the three of you, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So the first thing, let's start out with some easy ones up front. Is I've gotten questions a lot from, from industry is, when are assessments going to start? That seems to be a very common question that we have is, we keep hearing about assessments coming, but when are they actually going to start for, say a company that is not necessarily, pursuing a Pathfinder project, Pathfinder contract, just a general company that knows they've got to get CMMC certified, and they want to be on the front end for whatever reason. When can they expect to get their assessment done? I'll throw that out. Matt, what do you think? What do you think?
So we're already starting to schedule clients that want to have assessments. One of them is a Pathfinder company. So per our agreement as a C3PAO, and even all of us as provisional assessors, our agreement with DoD and the AB is that Pathfinders go to the top of the queue for the next couple of years. So what we're letting our clients know is that Pathfinder client, we've got to take care of them first. Then we'll work through all the commercial requests for everybody else. The other part that we're all working through as a C3PAO, we've got to be certified by DIBCAC. We're in process right now of getting ready. Our goal is by the end of March, maybe. But then we also have to ensure that everybody on our staff has gone through a DoD background check. So again, we're seeing another layer of potential, a little bit of drag to occur. What we're telling our clients right now, our expectation on when we'll be able to start to allow some slack in there, we're targeting May to June timeframe is when we expect assessments to start. And then it's just going to keep ramping up. The other thing to recognize in that process is, as assessors, we actually have to go through our own validation process on our first assessment by the AB reviewing what we're doing. And so that's going to cause a little bit of a drag on that first one. And I'm also letting clients know we're learning how to do this. So it's going to be a little slower for all of us at the very start too.
Sure.
So
And
setting
so,
some expectations.
don't all of the C3PAOs have to go through an assessment by DCMA as well, basically before you're allowed to do, to even be evaluated by CMMC AB? You have to go through an assessment of your own infrastructure, right?
Correct. And that's the process we're getting ready for right now. We're planning for DIBCAC to come here in the March timeframe, and which means we're getting audited by the real professionals, making sure that we're compliant too. And I'm excited for that because now I get to actually ask a lot of loaded questions to them on things like FIPS compliance and other nuances that I want to get an expert answer.
Sure. That's really good. So Stacy, talking about, some of these kind of sticky questions, there's been a lot of conversation out in industry about mobile devices specifically. When should mobile devices be considered in scope and out of scope when you're going through a CMMC assessment for your environment?
So basically, whenever they're in scope is whether if they're a level 1, right? If they have FCI, federal contract information, or level 3 CUI data. So if there's any mobile devices that could possibly have any of those data storing, transmitting, processing, then those need to be looked at and they need to be put into an MDM program. For instance, as a company, we give our folks phones. Now we've gone back and deployed software and made sure that we are deploying an MDM solution that will be ML3 compliant, because we don't know who might have CUI on their phone at any one time, or bring up an email someone sent them. You can't filter it out, not yet, not like where we do with when we have guards in TS and secret. But so you really got to get out there and use things like Intune or Mobile Iron or things like that, and you really have to get on it. But if you're not a regular personal phone, like my own personal phone, no CUI, nothing, that doesn't have to get assessed. So
yeah, so as long as that phone is not connected to your corporate infrastructure, you don't have to worry about it, right? If it's considered a personal phone that's not connected to your corporate infrastructure,
if it's not connected,
no work email address and such, then you're
to that scope fine. Boundary. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, great.
Scott,
So
Scott, can I clarify that point on one area? So a lot of people use personal phones for multi-factor authentication. That does not bring them into scope, just to
Right.
be clear on that. So a lot
Yeah.
of people get worried about that. That doesn't create a
If you're
scope.
just using
Right.
it as a multi-factor authenticate or a multi-factor token device, then that does
Yep.
not qualify because there's no
Right.
CUI or FCI potentially flowing to that device, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's very, very good
Exactly.
point.
Yep.
Very good point. Okay, great. So, Matt, what, are there going to be updates to CMMC as we go through this whole process? I know that there's been a big concern among a lot of people about how often, the CMMC standard is going to get updated, and our company's going to have to, jump to that basically. And then when will they be required to meet the new standard, right? So if say they get an assessment done, in April, they're one of the first ones that get assessed, right? And then in October, the CMMC comes out with, version 2.0 of CMMC. What will they have to do? Will they have to immediately get another assessment, or what is that going to look like?
Well, let's answer the first question. What we're hearing right now, and what also came out a little bit in the town hall from earlier this or last week, is that they're working on version 2.0 of the CMMC model. What we've heard for you, Reagan, and other people that are involved closely with the PMO, they're primarily realigning it against the new NIST 853 Rev 5. There may be some revisions of the Delta 20 practices going up into potentially level 4, level 5 requirements. But we're not expecting any changes at all. The 171 requirements will remain verbatim 171 requirements and will remain at level 3. So we know that's going to be the baseline threshold, no changes. Now, for example, when we get certified, we're probably going to get certified against the version 1.02 model and the version 1.1 assessment guides. If there's a change that comes after we're certified, as a part of our continuous monitoring and activities, we do need to bring ourselves into compliance with those revisions. What we expect right now, again, there's not a lot of clarity on this, is our validation does not become invalid. We just, when we have to get recertified at our 3-year point, we then have to meet the model at that point then.
Okay. That's really good news. I know there's a lot of people that were concerned that they would have to go back and immediately get recertified to get a contract after that point. So that's good news.
I mean, the work I'm doing on a subject matter expert to develop the curriculum, we're all really frustrated because it's slowing down getting the certified curriculum out for training.
Sure.
That's where we're frustrated. And we're asking the DoD to baseline when they're done with this one. They've got to let it go for a period so we can get the rest of the ecosystem up and moving.
Right. So Jerry, if I'm say I'm just a normal defense contractor, a couple hundred people, and I want to go through the CMMC certification process, get that assessment done. I'm not doing any Pathfinder, projects, contracts, or anything like that. We heard, from Matt and Stacy earlier that they're expecting that, the first assessment is going to start probably in the April, May, June timeframe. But I want to get my company, in line. I want to get this thing done, but I don't necessarily know that. Do I have to do it in 21? Can I wait till 22? And what kind of dangers or what kind of risk am I taking by not jumping on the assessment bandwagon, in the first 3 to 6 months? Can you talk a little bit about what that process, might look like for a company that's trying to assess that risk for them as an organization?
You bet. I mean, that's the question that 99% of America is talking about out there in the DIB. I mean, really, you have to start back at square one, back to the baseline of DFARS and NIST 171. As most of you probably know, the DFARS interim rule was implemented that actually requires you to report your NIST 800-171 security posture prior to December 1st of last year. You could sign a contract and self-attest. So you were kind of faking it till you make it if you hadn't got there. But now the DoD is saying, hey, we want to start moving you down the track to get CMMC certified, which means you'll be 100% compliant with CMMC level 3. You'll be audited by a third party. And then you become available and for an award for one of these pilot or Pathfinder contracts, and some of those Matt had mentioned. So it's a journey. It's not a a one-time deal. So we really recommend to our clients is start with NIST 171 if you haven't already invested. Do your self-assessment, do your incident response plan, and then start working on your POAMs. But you do need to report if you have DFARS flowdown clauses to the system performance risk system, the SPRS, which is now a requirement by the DoD, so they know what your security posture is, which now holds you accountable, and now that can be used for future contracts, new ones, as well as extensions that do not have the CMMC requirement. So they've actually begun the process. But once you get to there, then you look at your 20 new practices and your 5 processes, and then you begin to assess, well, what additional work do I need to layer on top of that? And then at that point, you get audit ready. And then at that time, there's a journey. When you feel like you're going to get audit ready, then you need to look at, well, how long is the backlog to get an audit from a C3PAO, from, like Matt mentioned, the Pathfinder or the pilot suppliers are going to be on top of that list. The first RFPs come out, I think they mentioned in March, April. The first awards happen in August. So they've already put a stake in the ground. If you're on that first Air Force award, it gets awarded in August. Now you have a time frame to say, between where I'm at to August, how am I going to get the CMMC ready, get the audit, and then be ready to receive the award. The folks that are on those first set of pilots have a real sense of urgency, to say the least. There's no real standard about how long it's going to take an organization to get there. Small ones that have a lightweight infrastructure can move quickly to a secure and compliant environment. And that's just what Katie Arrington says about, small businesses have an advantage to get their certification levels to win more business, where more complex companies have to do more work. So everybody has to assess, put in plans, budget, and get to that point of audit ready. And one thing that we haven't talked about is assessors, we're taught, well, what does audit ready mean? That means that your policies and processes are institutionalized, that it's observable, and it's really a cultural change, and that doesn't happen overnight. So now not only do you have to meet the requirements of practice and processes, you have to implement them so they become a cultural phenomenon. So having said all of that, you've got to set up and plan for that. And you might be able to do it in 3 months, it might take you 3 years. And that's the first real step that an organization needs to assess. So most companies are already late, especially if you're in your first set of contracts. But if you haven't filed your interim rule to the DCMA through the SPRS system, you're already late. So sense of urgency there.
So question on that, on the SPRS side, I mean, everybody doesn't necessarily have to have already submitted to SPRS unless you have a contract that requires or has that clause in it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure I understood that clarification. So speaking of assessments and kind of how these things are going to flow down, how far down, the subcontractor chain are we going to have to get this done, right? I know it's been talked about, a lot about how far down the chain this goes. Stacy, how far down, kind of the flow down clause? I know that it says all the way to the bottom, but does that really mean all the way to the bottom? What did you take there?
Yeah, I mean, if they have assets that are transmitting, storing, or processing CUI, yes. Now, a lot of subcontractors are using assets from the prime on site at the prime's location. So they're okay. They're not using their own assets or anything that isn't certified. But yeah, all the way down. If they hold CUI data, they have to be ML3 certified. So
do you guys think that there's going to be a decision by the primes to split, how they flow these down? Or are they going to, when I say split, are they going to say, okay, this set of companies on our contract are only going to need to be CMMC level 1 because they're not going to have access to CUI, but this other set are going to be CMMC level 3? Or do you guys think, from your conversations with companies that you're dealing with already, that basically primes are going to say, our entire team needs to be CMMC level 3. We're not going to do a subcontractor matrix, if you will, to try and manage this to that level. It's just too difficult. What are you guys seeing with that?
It's really difficult to manage data through internal systems, through the inputs, through the outputs from sales to shipping, and you got suppliers in there, and to really apply real data governance, data classification, so you really know what type of CUI and how much goes to one supplier versus another, and then manage that through either policy, process, or even automation. I would say 99.9% of the companies don't do that today. I think they just take it and pass it down. So for them to segment the data is a big lift that would need to be done first. So my estimate of effort would be just treat everybody at a level 3, make it easy, and then allow those suppliers to raise their bars if they want to do business with that customer. That's the fastest path.
Matt or Stacy, would you like to add on to that? I have something I'd like to add on to it as well. So
my thought is one of the first problems the prime's going to have is decontrolling CUI, because they've got to get DoD to sign off on something that's a level 3 and taking it down to level 1. And then potentially that level 1 is now regenerating CUI. I see that as probably one of the harder parts, where I think Jerry's spot on. It's going to be a level 3 team across the board. And then you're just going to work it that way.
You know, that's actually my concern as well, because, you know, what I see happening, or what I think is going to happen based on the companies that I've talked to, is that, you know, they're going to basically require their entire team to be level 3 at a minimum, regardless of if they expect to flow CUI to those companies or not. And so that's really going to throw out the window the estimations that the DoD made when they released all the interim rules about the size of the DIB and, you know, how many companies would need to be certified and such. Because if I recall correctly, they were stating that, you know, there's approximately 300,000 DIB members out there that they have identified as quote unquote DIB members that have contracts, and about 50,000 of those were expected to be able to need to get, you know, level 3 certified. But if the primes take this approach, then, you know, that 50,000 is going to balloon. It's going to be way more than 50,000, right? Which is going to really stress the CMMC certification architecture that is being put in place. And so that's my real concern there is, you know, if the primes don't try to, you know, specify, okay, only these companies need 1 and these other set of, you know, smaller set of companies need level 3, then we're really going to be in a situation where there's going to be, you know, issues getting enough companies through the process. So that's a big concern I have.
Just one additional add on to that from a supplier perspective. So this is going to be early adopter versus laggard, right? We know that based on what we talked about, primes or customers are going to look for, say, level 3 certified suppliers. And so if you are an early adopter, either because you're on a pilot or you get ready, you are suddenly going to be a low risk provider that the prime doesn't have to worry about, no matter how they use you. Where their existing suppliers might be saying, well, we're still waiting to hear the final outcome, so we're not quite there. Well, we can't work with you anymore. We're going to go with somebody that's already got that competitive advantage being level 3 certified. So this is where a lot of small, medium-sized businesses are going to be able to take up market share by treating cybersecurity with, you know, or treating this whole thing as an early adopter and really embracing it and moving forward, not only to protect their own information and their customers, but to get competitive advantage.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Jerry. So Matt, you know, we were talking about the SPRS a minute ago. You know, if you have the defarge clause in your contract, you know, you've got the 7012 clause, you've got the 7019, the 7020 clause in your contract, what have you, but you have no identified CUI in your environment. You don't get any from the government. You don't believe that you're creating any on your contract. There's nothing been identified as CUI in your environment. You're dealing only with FCI content. You know, do you have to submit an assessment first to SPRS? I mean, do you have to do that if you don't have any CUI?
Yes. So the short answer, even though you may not have it formally being given to you, you may be generating CUI. That may be a larger education issue that you need some expertise, like from Stacy's company, to come in and help you out. But when you look at it from the contractual point of view, you are required per contract to enter a score into SPRS. Right. The problem is, even if you don't handle CUI and for some reason you've got this clause and you don't enter a score into SPRS, you're not going to get selected when it comes time for an option award. And that's every time your year award comes along for that option period, you won't be on that list, which is why we see all the primes right now, even though there's not an official date, they want to make sure everybody in their supply chain has an SPRS score in, because they don't want to have their contract get screwed over because one of their subs doesn't have a score in. So get your score in. The other thing I tell everybody, score conservatively. The reason is you're now entering a formal record of your compliance. You've just now put yourself at jeopardy for a False Claims Act at 3 times the contract value of the work you're doing. It's not worth it to look good. Put an honest score in, put an honest POAM date in for when you're going to get in compliance, and update it as you go and get it looking better as you go along. But get your score in.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So, some of the new default clauses, the 19, 20, 21 has some language in there like the CMMC framework does not allow a DoD contractor or subcontractor to achieve compliance status through the use of plans of action. So basically what they're saying is, there's no POAMs allowed. You mentioned POAMs earlier. So how does that, work with what you just said about doing the POAMs?
So from a POAM's point of view, formally, when you go into your conformity assessment, you have to have no open POAM items for non-compliant actions. Right. That's, I quote unquote refer to this as the capital P POAMs, right? You are going to have POAM items. Oh, we're in the middle of meeting this mitigation for vulnerability management. That's patching. You're doing your job and you're using a POAM appropriately there. So again, we're going to come in, we're going to make sure you got nothing that is non-compliant in order for you to be certified with a POAM, but use a POAM to track all the normal stuff you should be doing in there because that's proving you're doing your process.
Yeah, that's good. So Stacy, Katie Arrington has recently, there's been a lot of conversation about reciprocity. And what does reciprocity actually mean? Because I've actually had some customers come to me and say, so I just heard that they're going to get reciprocity. We're ISO 27001 certified. I don't want to do that project anymore because since I'm ISO 27001, I'm going to automatically get CMMC level 3 and you cancel my contract or cancel my project, right? Is that correct? I mean, is that what reciprocity means, or does reciprocity mean something different?
Yeah. So basically what that means is the reciprocity they're talking about right now. The only thing I've heard about is reciprocity for the high DIPCAC, DCMA assessments, and FedRAMP. Mm-hmm. Everything else, and that's still not written down in stone. It's still going through the process. That's the only thing I've heard about. And for instance, if you had a high DCMA DIPCAC assessment, you would probably definitely have to have the 20 deltas looked at because those weren't included. But nothing's written in stone yet. We're waiting to hear about that.
Okay, yeah. So go ahead, Jerry. Were you going to say something?
I can. I just say the work that you've done on these other regulatory regimes is absolutely reusable, but it doesn't give you a free pass.
Right.
So basically, what you guys are saying is that that's great that you've gotten your DIPCAC high assessment done. That means that you've had your 110 have been assessed already. If they give reciprocity, then those 110, you might be able to get a quick checkbox on those 110, but the deltas plus all the maturity level processes, they're still going to evaluate as they go through and do a conformity assessment. Is that right?
It's not. So the problem is, and I see this in a lot of mappings, and I always go to multi-factor authentication. ISO 27002, the 2015 version, doesn't even have MFA in there. Because it's a risk-based approach. There's no controls in there for CUI marking and handling, et cetera, for sanitizing. All those things aren't necessarily in there. Physical security, you're good. So again, it's like Jerry said, you can reuse, but don't expect 100%.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, continuing down the reciprocity thing, this is a quote from Katie Arrington. I'm going to take my ISO 27001 and provide reciprocity. We're giving reciprocity for the DIPCAC assessments that have already been done. We're giving reciprocity when it comes to FedRAMP. Those memos are in the office of the undersecretary to be signed out. We've agreed upon all those terms with the AB, the CIO, and other stakeholders. So they're even looking at, FedRAMP, the DIBCAC, obviously the ISO. They're looking at all these standards, and it's great that if companies go through those standards, but you still have to see where there's deltas between those standards and the CMMC, and you got to make sure that you're meeting those CMMC requirements over and above those standards.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. I know Matt just said that ISO is risk-based. CMMC is data-focused, right?
Right.
And ISO doesn't address that. It doesn't even identify CUI within their requirements like CMMC does. And really, honestly, the DoD doesn't recognize the ISO certification with a lot of interest. The whole government's that way. They really look to NIST 171, and that's what CMMC is built on. It's all about data protection, data governance, and data cybersecurity. And this is where the problem is. And there's obviously risk involved with that, but it's really about protecting the data.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So, when a company has finally gone through this assessment, say they've gotten their conformity assessment done. Matt, let's say you finished a conformity assessment for a company. They were successful. They did everything correct. You submit it up. It gets approved by CMMC, by the AB and all of that. It's filed. It's done. What advice are you going to give to that company? Because now they've got 3 years, right, until they have to get another one completed. What advice are you going to give that company to help them as they are moving into this 3-year period where they're not going to have to be assessed necessarily by CMMC, but they want to maintain that compliance? What do they need to do?
So what you want to do is you want to carry the habits over that you started in getting you ready for that, the remediation, the double checking, all the things that are primarily required really in the configuration management domain. And so what you want to do as a part of that is just keep those practices going. You may be able to stretch out the meetings you used to have to maintain this. Where we're starting out with clients, we're starting them out at once a week because we got a lot to get through. And if you're not meeting routinely, it's just going to slide. You're kind of in that sustainment phase. You could go to monthly. You could even, maybe if you're small enough, go to quarterly. But you've got to still sustain the practices and the procedures you put in place to get to being compliant, because you're going to need that for that 3-year point down the road. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money reinvesting in getting yourself back to being done again. So take it a little bit at a time along the path is going to be the cheapest way to do it.
So Jerry, what about things like, you read a lot about continuous monitoring and those kinds of things. What is that going to mean for these companies that have to maintain that kind of, process internally, continuously?
Great question. I'll tell you right now that most small, medium-sized companies don't do any ongoing compliance programs. They don't have GRC tools. They're not doing monitoring unless it's very lightweight and it's the one IT guy in the firm that is not a trained cybersecurity expert nor compliance expert. So there's a lot of gaps and skill sets for a lot of the smaller and big companies. So as Matt just said, it's not only get compliant, which is really what NIST 171 is. It's a kind of a one and done, but then you walk away. CMMC adds a process to say, not only do you have to get there, but you have to stay there, right? And to stay there, you got to keep your docs up. You got to handle configuration changes. It's just like the FedRAMP, where if there's a major change to the environment, you kind of have to update everything. So you have it latest and greatest. And that's where Matt says, if you don't do that, after 6 months of just changes, you're suddenly, 6 months behind. You got to do catch up. So you really have to be programmatic, systematic, and have resources allocated to keep it up to snuff. And then you add in the SIM, the monitoring, all the other stuff that's more on the system side. Many folks are saying, I don't want to hire a team of cybersecurity people, operations people, IT people do this. I'm going to find a managed service provider like Summit 7 that can handle a lot of that with expertise. It's kind of like why we go to Microsoft, right? They spend millions of dollars or billions of dollars in security. So that's why they have the Azure Gov, GCC High. We go to that and transfer that risk because I don't want to build my own Office 365, right? I want to take advantage of the best practice in the highly secured organizations. I'll pay my fees to do that. Most small and medium-sized businesses are going to have to move to a kind of a managed service or a VC. So just to do that, given that they can't afford a full-time CISO to manage that ongoing program. So
Yeah, that's good. So Stacy, you know, there's been some conversation, you know, there's always new technologies coming out, right? And, you know, while these standards may not change, you know, we have to look at how we apply these standards to new technologies as released. And, you know, there's been some you know, a lot of talk out there about, you know, things like, you know, passwordless architectures and things, you know, so how will that impact, you know, CMMC, and should companies start looking at those kinds of capabilities?
So they certainly can, but we're talking about going further down the road, looking at capabilities that you might not be able to handle at this point. It is a great idea, right? I mean, so we've seen it over and over again where people have password lists right on their desks, in their drawers, in their pocket, written on their forehead. You know, I mean, it's a great idea. It's about the cost of implementation of all of these things, right? A lot of our folks that are thinking about going down paths like that are asking, "Hey, how much is it going to cost me? I need my budget. What's my CMMC IT budget?" And that would be one of them. So yes, it's a great path forward. Is it something that's going to be implemented immediately? If you can afford to go that way, which in the long run would really make sense because you're taking away that one area of risk for your company where people are really recording their passwords and really not using passwords that are any good at all, easily hacked.
So this question is a little bit out of left field maybe, but you know, kind of another thing that's pretty hot right now, or you know, what's called zero trust architectures, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that is? I mean, zero trust architectures, that obviously doesn't change the CMMC standard, but how, if you implemented a zero trust architecture in your environment, you know, how would that help you as you were, you know, as you're moving toward compliance? Matt, Jared, you want to jump in on that?
Well, I'll just take a little bit. I mean, it really depends on your environments. Like you go to Microsoft, they've got zero trust models that are reference architectures, but the real premise is to secure when you stand it up versus leave it open, right? And then you secure it, and then you open up access to the environment based on need. And that's really a best practice out there now is, you know, keep everything close at hand and protect your CUI and only let people access it that need it. That's the general way I look at it.
Yeah. So you know, with zero trust architectures, you have to assume that everybody and everything and every environment that you're sitting in is essentially malicious, right? And so, you know, basically with it being a data focused standard, CMMC being data focused, and you know, say that you've got data sitting on a laptop, essentially any network that you connect to could be considered a malicious network. And so you protect that, you know, protecting that device to that standard can really help you meet a lot of these standards for, you know, controlling the flow of CUI, ensuring that the devices have, you know, mobile device management capabilities and all of those capabilities that you deploy as part of CMMC. You know, I think that, you know, putting in a ZTA type, you know, approach can really help, you know, companies as they're trying to meet the CMMC requirements. So, you know, Microsoft is obviously moving that way. I know that I believe that Amazon is moving that way as well. So I think that, you know, I think that we're going to see a lot more of that out there. So, you know, transitioning away from the CMMC specific questioning lines, I would like to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing, you know, as C3PAOs, as assessors and such, and kind of what it's been like for you guys as you have gone through this process. I mean, I know that all of you guys, I believe, went through the provisional assessor training, right?
Yep.
So you're all, you know, you've been through that. What was that training like? I mean, you know, I think there was only, I think it's 101 of you guys that went through that training total.
Yep,
And that
100.
may be including the DCMA folks. So what was that training like, and how did it prepare you to be able to do this, not just assessment in general, but for CMMC specifically?
Well, I'll just do a quick start. It was great. We had practitioners from around the country, people that live and breathe this space, that were so informed and educated, and have that conversation around the CMMC AB board that was teaching it. It was very insightful, and so much insights about, you know, what the challenges are, and describing what maturity means, what institutionalization means, and that's what the DoD really wants, a cultural change in the industry. but what does that mean? So they gave a lot of examples, a lot of validation for the the provisional assessors to really have their perspective of when you're doing an assessment, how you have to look at it. It's not a checklist. It's things like observable, that it's institutionalized, things that, it's a different way of thinking about, how to do an assessment or an audit than traditional. And that really helped me understand that this is a long-term thing, that it's really built from sales to shipping across people, process, and technology, and about making it part of your business. Security by design within your business, if I want to take it that way. As the DoD, put out in the CMMC model, it becomes the foundation of performance. I can't remember the other two pillars that they've had, but it is foundational across the organization. If you can't secure it, then it's going to get stolen. So it really reinforced that cybersecurity is being taken seriously by the DoD, and how they want to organizations to begin to make it part of their culture. So that was my big takeaway.
Stacy, what'd you come out of the training with? What was great about the training from your perspective?
It was really interesting for me because I've been doing assessments for DoD for about 20 years, 853 assessments. So I'm looking from coming from a more technical area of actually getting in, doing scanning and pen testing and all that kind of thing. This is more of, hey, look, this is exactly what you need to do, and this is exactly where they need to be. So there's no ands, ifs, or buts. There's no poem. There's pass, fail. And a lot of people were freaking out about that, but it's like, you're trying to protect the DIB. It's obvious we have not been protecting it for decades. It's something that's been my passion for decades. And we're finally doing what I was hoping we would do. And they step you through the assessment methodology, exactly how it's supposed to be done. Like Jerry said, they gave great examples, which actually spurred a lot of good conversation between all the people in the class. So we only had, Matt and I were in this first class together. We only had, 3 days, Matt? 4 days?
Yeah. And we're the ones that made Jerry go to 5.
We could have used more. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was one of the classes that I can say I wasn't sitting there going, oh, brother. I really enjoyed that class. And that's a lot to say after being in a billion classes for the last 20 some years and certifications, right? So.
Good. That's great. That's great. Matt, anything that you'd like to add?
So from my end, Stacy's very blessed. She doesn't sit on the standards working group with the three of us where we're way in the weeds on FIPS and split tunneling and all the hell of that we go through. But because I was so involved in that side, understanding the framework, evaluating it, and all the relationships, when we got to, like Stacy was talking about, oh, this is how the C3PAO will function. This is how it was like, oh my God, this is all new. I haven't even thought of that yet. And I'm scribbling, taking notes because my brain wasn't even there yet. And it's like, oh crap, we're about to become a C3PAO. I've got to get all these processes, mechanisms and ready. There was moments of panic for me when we hit those days when I just kind of realized what I was really stepping into.
So kind of, you mentioned moments of panic. I've heard some, I won't say panic, but at least some concern from some of the C3PAOs specifically about one of the requirements that they have to meet, and that's the ISO 17020 requirement. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's important? What does that actually mean? I mean, that's a pretty big requirement to levy on the C3PAOs.
I'll go first. I've been reading it. So for us as a C3PAO, and we were chatting about this a little bit earlier, you've got to be 1721 compliant. And the real issue here is we've got to follow a standardized process. We've got to be independent. We've got to make sure there's no organizational conflicts of interest. And then on top of that, we're ready to deal with when there is a disagreement between the lead assessor and the organization seeking compliance. As a C3PAO, that's going to be my job. It's going to land on my lap, and I got to be ready to handle that. I'd rather resolve that at my level before it goes up to the AB or DOD. And so they're trying to make sure they're institutionalizing everything they need done. So As I talk with my staff, I talk about quarter pounders. Ray Kroc wanted a quarter pounder at McDonald's to be a quarter pounder, whether you're in Seattle with Jerry, or if you're in Virginia with Stacy, if you're in Huntsville down with Summit 7. A quarter pounder is a quarter pounder. Every assessment should be a quarter pounder. That's the goal they're after. And I'm not looking forward to the 1721 work, but I violently agree with the need to make everything a quarter pounder.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really comes down to, we're the assessors. We need to be held accountable, and we really have to be competent as an organization. We have to be impartial, and we have to be consistent, right? Those are the three things that the 20 standards really look at. And it does require a third-party examination. So it's not like we're self-attesting, right? People are going to come in and look at us, assess these things. So it's a heavy lift. It's less like getting a CMMC accreditation, not it's quite as many requirements, because there is more of a professional judgment by the assessor about how the organization will work. So it's that's a combination, but at the end of the day, they really want to make consistency and impartiality, and that we're competent. And hopefully the AB has selected the C3PAOs that they believe are going to be competent with the right sets of skills with folks like on the phone here. So I think a lot of it, it's an industry validation to make sure that the AB is doing the right stuff.
Yeah, it's really good. I agree that all those things that you were talking about really are very important, so that the OSCs, the DIB members, know that they're getting a fair shake from a professional organization when they get assessed. That's really important. So we're just about out of time. I'm going to do one more round here. And we all talk about CMMC level 3 because that's kind of the first focus, right? 130, practices there, and we know they're all important, just like our children, right? We love all the children. We love all the practices. But if you had to pick one practice that you think is the most important practice out of all 130 for a level 3 company, and this, I know that I'm putting you guys on the spot with this, what would be the most important practice for any company to implement? We know they're going to do all 130, but what's the biggest one? What's the one that can really, move the needle from a security standpoint for them? I have my answer. I'll give my answer unless one of you guys pick it up.
Wow. I think it's tied with access control and auditing.
Okay. Access control and auditing. Any specific one within that?
I mean, you've got to know who's on your network and what's happening in your network. You've got to see what it looks like before you've built it, while you're on it, and as you go down the road. And if you can't see what it looks like, then you're not going to know when you're hacked, and that's what's been happening.
Okay, that's good. Matt?
Can I have 3?
No.
One.
Well,
I got 2.
For me, when it comes down to it, the one that reduces your risk the most is multi-factor authentication at all levels.
Ding, 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 ding. That was the one I was going to say.
Well, yeah.
And I agree with Stacy. That's where I was going with. But if you don't know what's going on in your network and you don't have that SIM and you're not monitoring it,
right,
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's why I want 3.
Yeah, 3.
What do you got, Jerry?
Well, I like risk management because I think end to end, and I need to understand how to prioritize my resources and how to attack the problem. So I think that's really important. And if people don't do that, they're spending money and time on the wrong things.
Okay.
So having that good risk-driven plan to mitigate your risks and protect the data. You're not going to get there overnight, so let's maximize your dollars. Yep. The second one is what I call the identification and authorization, which really, knowing who they are, validating who they are, and then making sure they have access to the right stuff. So those are the two that come into access control. So if you can protect the stuff from people getting in, then it helps. Insider trading makes it a little harder, but you still can have internal roles, responsibilities, and access control in there. RBAC, if you want. Those are, to me, is the first line of protection.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, I think we're just about out of time. We're running right up against it. I really appreciate you guys taking time today to sit down with me and go through some of these things. I think that there's some good information put out there, and it's just a little window into what the world of a C3PAO looks like, and what our DIB friends can expect as they are looking to get assessed by probably some of you, some of the three of you over the next few months. So thank you guys for the time, and have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey,
Thanks,
thanks so much. Take care, guys.